Yeah.
We should be recording, so you could take my screen away like they used to do in the Twilight Zone. No, the Outer Limits.
So everyone can see that, I assume?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Yes.
So today I am talking about how to get more attention for your business online. Just a reminder what I do. I work with like solopreneur professionals who provide professional services to the general public to get them more attention and more clients. So people who are basically charging a fair amount of money for the average person. And I've been doing this for about 10 years, just a little bit under, mostly in-house for an immigration company in Canada. But hold on a second, I just realized I don't have my PowerPoint up. But I've also been doing that on my own for the last 5 years, first on the side and now full time. So basically, sorry, I dropped out of slideshow. There we go. The biggest problem right now, as everybody knows, is that there's too much noise online. There are tons and tons of people, but there are too many websites. There are too many people. There's just too much stuff. In the 90s, you could have put a website on the internet, as I'm sure some of you know, and you would get business immediately. I know my friend's dad put up one of the first architecture websites in Toronto, and still gets business because he had one of the first ever architect websites. He works by himself, and he just still gets business. But you know, I don't know if he's first, but he was probably in the top 3 or 4. It worked then. It doesn't work anymore. And that's true even of strategies that were working, say, 10 years ago and possibly even 5 years ago. Everything keeps changing. It's fluid. But the big common denominator is more and more and more and more noise constantly. Here is an example. This is 2 years old, but this is monthly traffic to websites. And I don't know if you can see, but there's a tiny dot at the top that says CNN, and it's about third of an inch high on my screen. I don't know what it would be on yours. So CNN, which is a very popular website, gets very little traffic compared to say Google, Facebook, and YouTube and all this stuff. So, and any of our sites would be, I'm not sure they would qualify as a pixel on this graph. They would be very, 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 very small, which is a very big burden to overcome. There's some good news. Of those 2 billion websites I mentioned, only about 400 million are active. So the non-active ones, the inactive ones, are not getting any attention. And more good news is, as of a year or two ago, 36% of American small businesses didn't actually have a website. Now, that's an average, and who the hell knows for anyone's particular industry where that is, and you certainly can't rely on that, but it's an interesting piece of information. I thought I actually didn't know that. If you're lucky, you're in an industry where some people just still haven't gone on there, but of course, most people, that's not true, right? And now, virtually every company, at least that I'm aware of, has a website unless they're really not relying on a lot of online business. Doing this is not actually as hard as it sounds. The world I'm in, a lot of people are very intimidated by it because there's a lot of jargon, especially when it comes to search engine optimization. But in all parts of the industry, there are people who are spewing out all sorts of words that have very, very specific meanings that sound really sophisticated and magical when really, like SEO, for example, sounds really complicated, and it really isn't that complicated. It's complicated sometimes to do it well, but like the actual act of doing things is not particularly complicated. It just requires, getting attention on the internet just requires the right strategies. It requires committing a lot of time, unfortunately, and it requires consistency of purpose over time. I can't stress that enough. I've worked with many people who like to change their minds regularly because something didn't work for 3 weeks. And if there's one thing I've learned in 10 years or so of doing this, is that like doing something for 3 weeks is almost as bad as not doing it at all. Because you basically, it's everything in this world is like repetition, and it's I always call it like the very slow moving snowball. It's like it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's just the hill is really, really flat, and it takes a really long time to get moving. Once it gets moving, it's great, but it takes a very, very long time to get it moving. So 3 steps to getting found online. Tell the internet why you exist and where you are. So tell the internet about your UVP and tell them where, if you serve a geographical area, you tell them that you serve that area. And then tell the internet that you've told the internet that. And then tell the internet that you've told the internet that you've told the internet that. And I'm joking a little bit, but it will make sense. It's true, and I will explain a little bit later why I mean that and why I phrased it that way. It's, as I said before, it's a little bit like a constant repetition of doing the same things over and over and over again, and hopefully better, but constantly iterating. So first off, tell the internet what makes you unique, why you're unique, how you're unique, and where you are. So we all know we should have a contact page. We all know we should have an about page about the company. You all provide services to other businesses, so you presumably have pages describing those services on the internet. The key thing to remember is that across the board, that has to be a consistent message. And that message needs to be, they need to reinforce each other. You know, you don't want one page saying, I'm going to pick on Kevin, but you don't want one page on your website saying you're in Oakland and you're serving the Bay Area. If you only say that once, maybe Google doesn't know. You know, I will tell a little anecdote about that in a moment. But you also need to, in this day and age, unfortunately, you need to produce a lot of content that reinforces these things, whether it's written, video, or I mention audio, but I'm not big on that, and I will explain why in a few minutes. So you make it prominent across what people in the internet marketing world call channels. So your website, your Google business page, which if you don't have one, you probably should have one. I think in the B2B world, it's a little less important. It's certainly less important than like in the brick and mortar world, but it's still, does everyone know what I mean by Google business page? It's the thing that pops up on the right side of the search results with your company name on it. So people see that first. If they're Googling your business, they see that before they see your website. And if that's not there and somebody else is there, that's bad. Or if it's there and say it has like 1.5-star reviews, that would also be bad, but that's a different problem. I have very strong opinions about how to social media market and where, but I do still think, as Sandra talked about a month ago, that LinkedIn profiles are very, very important. And I would also say that even if you're not marketing on Facebook at all, it's still good to have a Facebook business page, just so that if people are using Facebook like a search engine, they find you. They saw that, you saw that big picture, the big bubble or circle rather of Facebook in the previous slide. You know, people do use that as a search engine on occasion. Other profiles might be worthwhile too, depends on your industry. But something I want to emphasize is directories. Directories had a really bad name for a really long time because a lot of them were like just literally lists of thousands of websites, and they were awful, and they were a way of building links in a really spammy way. You know, you just pay somebody to link from this directory and that directory. So I don't mean those directories. The directories I mean are directories in your industry that they are saying, you know, if for example, Kevin, there was a directory of Bay Area green businesses, that would be a place that you might want to think about looking into. And it depends. The directory needs to be specific. It needs to be important to your niche, but like it's a thing to not forget, because there are other places like this on the internet too. Like anywhere you can list your business that is relevant to your clients is a place that you probably want to have that. So we're going to pick on Kevin.
Cool.
Kevin told me the last time we talked that he's actually thinking of no longer emphasizing his location, so this may not be true for him anymore, but you know, it's important to mention that you serve a particular niche, a geographical niche. If you do, it's important to mention it across all platforms or in channels. It's important to mention it multiple times on the page. It's important to get really specific about it. So if there's a town in the Bay Area that has a lot of, you know, green businesses, like say it's for whatever reason, people have collected around there, and there's like a strong you know, eco movement thing happening in that town. You want to have a page about that town, talking about like how you serve the people in this town and what a good job you do. And because unless the town, I mean, it depends. There's a threshold, right? You don't want to like focus on a village of 500 people, but like the competition is usually, it's for San Francisco, it's for San Jose, it might be for Palo Alto. They're not necessarily looking at the other places. And if you know your niche is focusing on a particular geographic area, then, and you want to focus on that geographic area, there's an opportunity there. You also, of course, want to be very specific about your type of client. You want to be specific about how you serve them, and how you serve them can be a really good way of creating content, right? You explain the things that you do. You don't want to give away the whole story, obviously, but Kevin can write various blog posts or service pages about the various types of strategy assistance that he provides. And again, you don't want to give away everything. You don't want to give away the secret sauce, but you want to also, I'm sorry, I'm just going to look at the chat for a second. Yes, it's reminding is a good idea too. Yeah, so you could also in non-pandemic times, you can also look at physical places for some offline stuff as well. It's I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Kevin, but it's in this it wouldn't be a bad thing to look at physical things offline in normal times. And then you also want to talk about why you're the best. Obviously, everybody knows that, but the important thing to remember is emphasizing that you are the right person, not just occasionally, but all the time and in different ways. Because if you do it the same way all the time, I assume everyone knows that duplicating pages over and over again is a bad thing. But if you don't, if you have the same page, if you just slightly vary the page over and over again on your website, you are going to be penalized for that. Hold on. Oh, sorry. I took my, there we go. So 2 examples. I had a very unique client providing psychotherapy and yoga together. So she would do yoga with her clients, and she would also talk to them about their problems and help them work through it at the same time. And she is in a very weird part of the country. She is in a small town outside of Ottawa, Ontario, and she's about 35 minutes from Ottawa. And she is serving a very specific place. And that was obvious on one page of her website. One. There was nothing on her Google business page about it. There was, like, Google and Bing couldn't figure out that she served a niche. So she was essentially competing with the entire world. Every physiotherapy plus yoga person in the world was competing with her, because that's all she had on the website indicating she served. And we started focusing on the communities, including Ottawa, but the greater Ottawa area, and some all sorts of small places in Eastern Ontario that I'm sure all of you have never heard of. I hadn't heard of some of them, even though I've driven through there many times, and focusing on that. And she's the only person there who does that stuff, but she needed to emphasize that. And I have an opposite story, which is a paralegal I've worked with who is located in a suburb of Toronto and not actually in Toronto. And she had focused all her efforts on attracting people in Toronto. Toronto, you may or may not know, is like the 4th or 5th largest urban area in the Canada-US combined. There's anywhere between 6.5 to 8 million people here, depending on where you draw the lines. And if you say Toronto, you are competing with every single other paralegal in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, sorry. And so that's a silly thing to do, especially if you're not downtown, because when people find out you're not downtown, they might be annoyed. So she had to switch where she was targeting to the suburbs outside of Toronto. She works in a place called Markham, but there's almost 1 million people in a 30-minute drive from her office. And she wasn't targeting any of that. She was targeting Toronto, this giant thing. And so again, it's about letting the search engines and your users know that you are here, you're in this specific place. Because if you don't do that, it's a lot harder in this day and age. Like I said, in the 90s, it wouldn't have mattered, but now it absolutely matters. I found this, I'm trying to inject a little bit of humor. This is somebody's idea of what social media was before the internet. It's dated. You can see it's a couple years old because someone mentioned Foursquare in it, and like who even knows what Foursquare is anymore? But given that I'm about to talk about social media, I figured it was a good place to start. It's one of my central messages of this is like doing marketing online is basically marketing offline, but it's the same thing. You want to do the same things you were doing before. You have different tools to do them. So telling the internet that you've told the internet about your UVP. So it's a really big noisy world, and you want to find your niches. Finding your niches can be very, very hard, but there are some good places to look. Obviously, social media, you want to be particular. There are LinkedIn works for B2B, but there are many other social media networks that may not, or they might. My favorite whipping boy is Pinterest, which I hate and I don't get. And I think Pinterest is probably useless for most companies, unless you're like, I don't know, a dressmaker or something, or maybe you bake cakes, and then it makes a hell of a lot of sense. But generally speaking, it makes no sense to me, and I'm mystified by its success. And I think you can apply that reasoning maybe a little more fairly and nicely than I did to all the major social media networks, and but more importantly, I think is something that gets neglected, which is forums, community forums in your niche. There are so many forums, and I just like to briefly mention, because I don't think I've mentioned it to you guys. I apologize if I've told this before, but many years ago, I had a Dirt Devil malfunction. My ex-girlfriend had bought a Dirt Devil and it broke. And I went on the internet to try and find out what to do. And I found myself in a vacuum cleaner forum, and there was more than one of them. And I asked a question. I got treated really poorly by someone who cared way too much about vacuum cleaners, who accused me of being a terrible person for buying a Dirt Devil, even though I didn't personally purchase it. But the point is that it was there, and I didn't know it was there.
You abused your Dirt Devil, right?
I did. But the point is being that there is a forum for vacuum cleaners. In fact, there's more than one. There are competing forums for vacuum cleaners. There are probably forums for what you do. And now the question is, will your clients know about them? And that's where it's like, well, should you spend time there or not? But it's not always better. It's possibly a better thing than going to social media and shouting about your business into the void, depending on, and the same applies to social media groups, right? Because they are essentially forums. So whether it's LinkedIn groups or Facebook groups or whatever, they have the similar things. The one thing about forums you need to remember is they have rules, and you need to follow them. And if you don't follow them, you will be kicked out or suspended or whatever. And that's not great. And then finally, believe it or not, sometimes comment sections are good places to at least look for people's names, do some research about them. There are tons of whether it's actual like YouTube, or whether it's just a journal or other piece of media about your particular industry. There might be places to look for, to have a profile, to post helpful hints depending on the kind of community. Obviously, most of us think of comment sections as being very, very toxic, but good comment sections are actually really good and helpful. And sometimes you may find that's a good place to tell people about your business as well. Again, just like forums, they have rules, and they may not welcome particularly aggressive selling. Once you have your niche, then you can do things to actually tell the niche about it. The most obvious being paying for ads, both on search and on social media. I actually read a really fascinating post just this morning about how even though organic social media is basically dying, paid social media is actually doing quite well. And I've seen a lot of evidence lately to show that social media ads well, first of all, they have more, you can target better than search engine ads. And secondly, their conversion rate's just a lot better than, say, like just organically sharing a post. What I mean by organically is not paying. So you want to share your content that you're creating on your website that talks about your UVP. You want to share it on social media. You want to share it on these forums. You want to do guest posts if you can. A guest post is when you go to another more popular website and write something about your expertise. And that more popular website is in your niche. You don't want to go into some, it's not helpful so much to go to a really, really broad website, but if the website is in your niche, bring you in as an expert and having you like write something is a very good way of getting traffic to your website. Interviews, of course, just like in the old days, you want to get interviews with media if possible. And now in the era of way too many podcasts, getting podcast interviews is also a good thing to do, where if there is a podcast in your particular business niche, if you can get yourself on there or somebody from your company on there talking about your business, provided, of course, the podcast is actually listened to, which is a problem for a lot of podcasts. And then features in any kind of other relevant digital media are also good. And the reason these things are in many ways better than offline stuff, though obviously any mentions in newspapers now will be on their website too, is because they give you links. And I'm not going into detail today about SEO, but like links are good. Links from reputable things are really good, because it basically, it's the rising tide. The more stuff that you have pointing at your website as an authority will lift your boat up and make you more discernible through all the noise we've been talking about. So pick on Kevin again. He has a LinkedIn profile. We were talking about that a month ago. It's very important, given what Kevin does, to have a LinkedIn profile, I think, because you can be looking for, a lot of people who might be looking for that kind of help might be looking on LinkedIn. There are probably countless online communities focused on green business and green energy in general, that there are places to lurk, hang out, spend time, become an established expert in the field. I don't know, Kevin, if there are any online business incubators, but I figured I'd mention it because they probably exist somewhere, or at least forums as a step towards that, which would be another idea. And then Kevin I hope I'm not outing you here, Kevin, but you've mentioned to me a few times you were thinking of doing comics. So
Sure.
doing comics as say if you were to send out your comics in a newsletter, you'd also want to put them up on an Instagram. You might be one of the only people doing comics about, green business strategy. And if you are the only person doing green comics about green business strategy on Instagram, you will be found. Now, if you're the fifth person, it's way less likely. Kevin's also talked to me about brief YouTube videos, and that is something that YouTube is the third most popular search engine in the world, believe it or not. And so that is something that is, unfortunately, it's very cost prohibitive to get onto YouTube and do well, but it's also something you want to think about, because people, like, if I have I know this doesn't apply to Kevin, but if I have a thing I need to fix in my house or on my computer, I go to YouTube and I watch YouTube videos. And that may or may not apply to your industry, but it's worth thinking about. And then lastly, podcasts. Don't do a podcast. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of podcasts out there right now. And in the business world, there are probably still hundreds of thousands of business podcasts. If you have a niche and there is nobody else doing a podcast about that niche and you think there's an audience for it, then give it a try. But like, I think the central message of this, I wrote it down, is like, people are way more likely to watch a 90-second or 3-minute video than they're going to listen to 45-minute conversation, right? And so if you have to make a choice between video and audio in this day and age, I personally would say video always, unless you have, like I said, unless you're the only people, your business is the only people doing this particular niche, and you believe there's enough of an audience for it to spend that time, because it is time consuming, podcasting. So tell the internet that you've told the internet that you've told the internet about your business. What do I mean? Basically what I mean is cross-channel promotion. Cross-channel promotion means taking stuff you do on one part of the internet and telling other parts of the internet that you're doing that. So if you make YouTube videos, you don't just leave them on YouTube, you put them on your website, you share them on social media, maybe you post them in forums. If you have a particularly successful share or piece of content out there, you put that in other places, so that or at least link from the other places you have profiles to it, so that people know it's there. So say you tweeted something and it was a really popular tweet. You want that popular tweet to be known on other parts of the internet. So might be on your website, might be on LinkedIn, might be on Facebook. You've probably seen a lot of companies now have their Twitter role on their website. They're doing that because something is telling them that that's driving engagement. So it's easier to do it when you've had success doing it, but it's good to just try doing it to start with, because you don't know what's going to work really ahead of time. It's all guesswork, and so you want to increase the probability that whatever you're putting out there is going to get seen, and not just on the one place that you tried to put it. Everything should reference everything else, not just in terms of linking to something else you did, but also in terms of mentioning, what's good about you, what's unique about you, what's important about you. And as I said, I alluded to earlier, if you have something that works somewhere, you should try it somewhere else. So if Kevin is in a forum somewhere and he's talking to somebody about eco-business strategy, and someone asks him a question, one of the things he could do eventually in the conversation is like, check out my LinkedIn profile or check out my about page or whatever like that. In a forum, you want to be careful when you do that. If you wrote something on LinkedIn and just wrote it for LinkedIn and people read it, about, like I said, about eco-business strategy, then you might want to think of either publishing it on your website or at least mentioning it on your website somewhere, and just like creating essentially an interconnecting web. Everything's connected to everything else. As I hinted to before, if you send out a newsletter full of comics about how to not make how to make good strategy decisions or how to not make bad strategy decisions, it shouldn't just be in your newsletter. It should be on Instagram. It should be on LinkedIn. It should be on your website. You don't want to like leave off the thing that you're doing from a very fundamental part of your business. So like anything you are doing somewhere online should probably also be on your website. And anything you create for a third-party hosted service, so like YouTube, for example, should be on your website, because, which is I guess what I just said, because they don't necessarily, the people who are visiting your website don't necessarily follow you on social media and vice versa. And so you want to make sure you're covering all boats. And there's ways of figuring out how to do that well. Oops, wrong button. So two examples, one personal, one not so personal. I was once at a SEO conference or just search engine marketing general conference many years ago. And there was this company there that they make machines for office work. And one of the things they do is they make binders. I don't think I have one in front of me. Oh yeah, I sort of do. Here we go. Like, well, I'm sharing my screen, and that's not gonna work. But basically, the plastic binders that bind paper, and it's deadly, right? Like people see the machines, but otherwise it's a very boring subject. They created videos that showed people, 45-second videos of people using the binding machine a bunch of times, and their sales went way up. And I understand that that's e-commerce. It's not the same as B2B, but there are ways of utilizing stuff you create on one place to reinforce the stuff you create on other places. So in this case, they made YouTube videos about something that seems like a really boring thing, and they brought it into their website. So it was on YouTube and their website, and was able to increase sales of their devices that like are really not very interesting. Also, the immigration company I used to work for, we tried to be successful at YouTube marketing for a very, very long time, and we're mostly failing, though it was very cheap what we were doing. That's a long story. But one day somebody had the idea, I hope it was me, but I don't remember if it was me or not, to take the popular articles from the website and turn them into videos. And so all that required was someone to read the article, and someone to put some pictures in the video. And it turned out that the things that were popular on the website were mostly also popular when they were turned into videos on YouTube. And the branding of the company went like crazy on YouTube. Now there are other problems with this approach, but at least as an example of using content, reusing content, it's a good one, because there wasn't a lot of work involved in creating these videos. There was a lot of work in creating new videos from scratch, but these videos that were just someone reading it over pictures, was relatively inexpensive, and they were also long, because all the successful content was long. So it's easy to think about doing all these things, but if you don't have a goal in mind, it's really hard to figure out how to do it and where to do it and that kind of thing. So what you do, how you do it, and how much time you put into depends on why you're online. So the two extremes are the convenience store that everyone walks by and doesn't need a website, because you just walk into it because it's on your way home, or drive around the corner to it, versus an e-commerce site that gets zero business offline and needs to focus everything online. Obviously, in this day and age, everything's much more online because of the pandemic, but in normal times, it's a balance. is your website online because you just want something to legitimize yourself because everyone should have a website, or is your website online and your other stuff online because it's a fundamental part of the decision-making process for your clients? And the more your online content is a fundamental process of the decision-making process for your clients, the more effort and time and money need to go into this. The more you do that stuff offline, the less you have to worry about it, obviously. And I said 3 steps. I lied. There is another step. And that is, to do this well, you have to collect data, unfortunately. That's the world we live in. And you should track as much as you possibly can. When I say that, I'm referring to Google Analytics. Facebook has an analytics program. LinkedIn has an analytics program as well that you can set up on your website. So people who are logged into their Facebook account who hit your website are actually tracked in the same way, that relatively similar way that Google Analytics tracks visitors. You need to know this information because you want to know who's coming to your website and your other properties, how long they're there for, because that's really, really important, whether they do the things you want them to do on your website, which are very important, whether it's buying or just signing up for a newsletter or whatever it is. You need to know these things, and the more granular detail you have about them, the more you can actually market directly to those people rather than just guessing, because at the end of the day, guessing is not going to work a lot of the time. It's good to collect the data. It is also good to analyze it. If you just collect the data and puke it out, it will be meaningless to you. Analyzing it is a really, really tough part of it, obviously, and that is particularly true now because there's so much of it, and it's tough to know. Like in a small business, it's really, really tough to get the right people who can do that for you, because as much as I think personally like Google Analytics is super intuitive, I understand that it is absolutely not super intuitive. I've just used it for a very long time, for example. So, there are all sorts of free training courses online about how to use, and pay ones as well, about how to use these various tools. But like, if you're just collecting the data and you don't know how to interpret it, that is not going to really help. But the first step is to collect. So this is all about know-how versus resources. It's one thing to know. It's another thing to actually do it and do it well. First, you need to obviously learn what to do, and then and that not just in terms of the actual tactics you use, but like why you're doing this. Why is your business online? Why is your business marketing itself online? To what end? Are you trying to get customers or clients who are coming strictly from the internet, or is there some offline component to it? And that determines where you put your time and your money. I have a little example here about a waste of time that I think that there's lots of them, but like everybody I think knows now, your website needs to be fast and secure. It needs to have a little padlock, and it needs to be fast. If you look at your Google Analytics and people are spending a lot of time on your website and they're not bouncing just means leaving without doing anything, and your website seems slow, it's not slow to the point that it's a problem, right? So don't spend hours and days trying to fix the speed by a little increment just because everyone says your site should be faster. If your site's fast enough for your niche, then you can put that on the back burner and focus on something that's going to make a bigger difference to your business right now. On the other hand, if your website doesn't have the padlock, and you have no SSL certificate, and people see the red screen of death when they come to your website, you need to fix that like yesterday. So it depends on what it is, and it's important to think about, why are you doing these things? Will this actually make a big difference? And data is important in figuring that out. So what should you do? If you haven't already articulated your goals for your internet marketing, you should obviously figure it out what that is. I'll send this to everybody, so don't worry. And you should ensure the various things about your UVP and also your geographic niche are everywhere as much as possible. Now, obviously, you don't want to mention that you're, say, in Oakland 75 times on a page, but you should mention that you serve these various communities everywhere. You should mention, like on each page, you should mention what the specific thing that makes you the reason this particular eco-business should go to you for their strategy should be all over the place. It shouldn't just be on the occasional page. If it's everywhere, you're going to do much, much better. You do need to make sure there are no really, really big technical SEO issues on your website. If you don't look at your website regularly, I strongly suggest you do that occasionally. I also strongly suggest getting a friend or a colleague to do so from a different computer, especially somebody who hasn't visited recently, because you might be seeing something different if you haven't cleared your cookies. You should, as I said earlier, Google Business Page. If you don't have one, you should probably have one. They're really low maintenance unless you have a lot of reviews. It's just essentially putting up your like contact information and about us information on Google instead of your website. It's you could do it, provided you have some quality photos already, you could do it in like 15 minutes. And people are going to see that, and when they weren't actually making it your website. And then Facebook page, and I think even though Facebook marketing is probably not appropriate to most, if not all of you on this call, still having the Facebook business page with your contact information is not a terrible idea. LinkedIn profiles, everyone has one. We know that already. A LinkedIn business page, as Sandra mentioned a month ago, is also a good thing to give you some legitimacy there. And then, after you've done all that, create content about how good your business is and about why you make a difference and why you do things, and put that content all over the internet as much as you possibly can. Again, depending on how much your business depends on online clients. And that's it. So I guess I should look at the questions, because I saw a bunch of stuff in the chat.
So Raleigh, if you want to go ahead and unlock your screen, and
Yes.
yeah, there were a lot of good comments. So why don't we just do an open forum here? Anybody have a specific question or thought or a aha moment?
That went way longer than I thought to. Sorry.
That's all right. It's a big
Time myself
subject.
at 25, not 40. But
Always does.
Somebody asked a question about uploading videos natively versus something else. I was interested
sure.
in that.
Yeah. So there is a big debate in the SEO world about whether you should use YouTube, which steals your link juice, as they say, or whether you should use a company that doesn't do that, or whether you should host them on your own website. I would absolutely not host them on your own website. You're going to pay a lot of money to your provider for hosting videos. The moment you have a few of them, they take up a ton of space. Also, they're going to kill your bandwidth. It's just a really bad idea. YouTube has like millions of servers probably that are handling this, so you should let them handle it. I really don't believe in the YouTube stealing value from your site if you put a YouTube video on your website. I know that the internet, Google and Bing read it as a YouTube video as opposed to a video on your website. I have not seen enough data to suggest that that's actually hurting. Like, videos on your website often significantly increase conversion of visitors to your website. So what I would say is YouTube, it's really easy to use YouTube and you don't have to pay for it. So you can do that, and you could get a very big boost in conversion from having those YouTube videos, or you can pay for a service that's supposedly gonna be nicer to your SEO. And you can, learn that process and do all that and hopefully get the same results from conversion, while possibly getting a slightly better number of visitors to your site just because you didn't use YouTube. Again, I haven't seen data that's convincing that this is a thing.
I think we were talking about uploading natively to LinkedIn, to Facebook, rather than having it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I really do think that if you, I guess it depends, because if you have decided that the place to do your videos is Facebook, because you've seen compelling data, which I have seen, that Facebook videos are really, in certain industries, really, really effective, then you shouldn't put them on YouTube first and then move them over. On the other hand, if your plan is to start just videos in general and put them all over the internet, I would do them on a website in which, on a service like YouTube, where you can put them all over the internet. It depends what the purpose is. So if you only want to have videos on LinkedIn, or you only want to have videos on Facebook, by all means use the native Facebook stuff. You can also mix and match and see what works, right? The one of the lessons that I would like to convey, if I haven't already, is like, everybody is guessing. They're guessing with a lot of information, and the guesses are educated, but they're still guessing because at the end of the day, whether it's Google or whether it's the social media platforms, they're all now being run by algorithms that are making decisions that human beings have passed on to these AIs. And those change constantly. The code of those things is edited, in the case of Google, multiple times a day. And so things that work in the past may not work now. And the only and things that work for one specific niche, like say, especially the stuff that works for e-commerce, may not work for what you do. And so the best thing you could do is also the most time consuming, which is to try more than one approach and see which is better, unfortunately, because, you know, what worked for, say, a paper binding company may not work for you. But I do think if you are convinced that, say, LinkedIn videos are the way to go, and you start putting them out and they're working, then you pay no attention to YouTube. It's all, I mean, it's a hard, it's hard to know, like in the abstract, which is going to work better. Again, unless you want videos everywhere, and then I would say YouTube.
Yeah,
Sorry
but
for the
it's so easy to embed on any of those platforms. So
it is.
So unless there's some specific thing like a Facebook where it demotes you because you're not using their video, I would say, you know, using YouTube or whatever works for you guys, and then just do the embedding. It's certainly super easy to embed on a WordPress site. So,
well, the other thing that we need to consider here is that you can make Facebook video ads, and you can. I don't think you can do that with LinkedIn. Maybe you can, but Facebook video ads, for example, you can't. I don't think you can pay to share your YouTube video on Facebook the way you could a native Facebook video. But that would be if you're deciding to use Facebook ads, which, given that you're all in B2B, I would say is probably not something you want to spend money on. But
well, one of the things, and maybe I wasn't clear in what I was trying to ask there, but I was like, if it's like a general SEO just to, you know, cross-platform, like, could you like have it on YouTube, natively host it on Facebook too, and then in your Facebook post say, I don't know, go watch this same video on YouTube. I don't know, or like,
yeah, absolutely. And the crazy thing is that for some stuff, people will absolutely do that. If you created something that was captivating enough, absolutely, somebody would totally do that. There are people who watch things over and over and over again. I don't know why they do it, but they do.
Or maybe it's like I have more information or links, or I don't know, on YouTube in the description.
Yeah.
So
So you could say, I have a full description or the full script, maybe, because one of the things you can do, I mean,
right.
YouTube has a cap, a word count. I don't remember, 2,500 or something like that. If you had a video that was shorter than that, and you said, oh, you want to see the script, yeah, it'd be a nice subtle way of sending people over there without saying, just watch the video again. Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah, that actually brings up a good point too on YouTube. Anyways, it should be a strategy on how you lay out content on it. So. You know, I was talking about these 3-minute, 5-minute videos, and I had this conversation with Mike yesterday. In fact, the whole idea is that it's little pieces, but if they all fit together, and then somebody comes to your YouTube channel, oh, there's more content here, then they start clicking through on it. So,
well, and that's the benefit of YouTube.
Probably makes sense rather than just doing, I don't know.
Yeah, the benefit of YouTube is if you are in a business in which you can create compelling videos. Whether they tell your brand story or whether they do a good job of explaining how you work with clients or whatever it is, YouTube will suggest there's an option there for a person to like binge your stuff. Now, whether or not that actually turns them into a client is another story. The other thing is YouTube may suggest somebody else's stuff. That does happen in a way that does not happen on other social media.
Excellent.
One thing to keep in mind when you're working with all this content, because now the next step is, oh my God, I got to create all this content that's going to align with my strategies. Don't forget to set up some kind of tracking tool so you know what you've posted, where, what it is.
Absolutely. And
think about how you can reuse that stuff rather than constantly having to create new content from scratch, because it'll make you just crazy. So
yes.
Instead, think about, I don't know, a video or a blog post, and then you can repurpose that into here's the social media posts and where they're going to go and when they're going to go there, and then you know, here's the link to the YouTube video with the script in it or whatever. But do set up some kind of tracking tool for yourself, because otherwise you'll just go nuts trying to remember what you did where and when and how.
And related to that, I had a huge amount of success, not with even repurposing content, but republishing it. So once the immigration company I used to work for got very successful with its content marketing, we went back through all the old stuff that wasn't successful and started changing the date and the title and updating. You know, if the laws had changed, you had to change some of the text, but otherwise mostly not touching the text. And suddenly that stuff got read, and it got read because now the website was more popular. Now this is a problem that, or a solution that only happens once you start getting stuff read, but like it's another thing you can do, reminding, you know, just because you created something in the past and it didn't work the first time, if you were looking for ideas and the choices between spending a whole bunch of time creating something new or tweaking something from the past that you thought should work and didn't, it might be worthwhile going back and looking at that thing and figuring out what we did wrong and doing it again, because that might actually save you a lot of time and money to do that.
Makes sense. Great.
What would be the number one problem you see that you would guess that we're all probably making?
Well, most of the people I work with are providing are not B2B, right? So they're providing services to the general public. So for me, the number one problem I see is I was sorry, I hammered it home a little bit in the presentation, is the geographic thing, the like failing to say I am in this place. Now, if you provide services to the entire world, that is not a problem, and you have to find different ways of differentiating yourself. So you have to be much more focused on your actual business niche, I think. But I would say that is the general thing, is that not enough, like, because I've worked with a lot of people who create a lot of content, but it's not necessarily to a purpose, right? Like it's like, oh, my competitor has a blog, I'll have a blog. My competitor is on YouTube, I'll be on YouTube. So I guess really the answer to your question is to have a target. You know, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to be the best, the most known business in my particular niche, in my particular area? What is that? And then every time you do something on the internet, it has to be to that goal. Because if it's not, it's not necessarily having more content on the internet is not gonna be bad for you in that way, but it could be a huge waste of time and money. And of course, it obviously depends on what's in that content, because you know we've seen huge numbers of social media snafus by various businesses over the years. But if you're not going to that particular purpose, then it's essentially like you're spending money for no reason. You know, if you're say blogging, and those blogs are not relevant to your goal, your end goal of being the authority for this particular business niche on the internet, then you might as well not write them. And that could be a matter of just tweaking what you're writing as opposed to not writing that thing. It depends on what it is, or as again with the videos, recording that video. But I think that like it's really important to have like an end goal. This is why we're on the internet, and we're trying to convey this to people, and so that message needs to be everywhere. And I think you know, usually that message for my clients is that they just have utterly failed to tell people physically where they are. But I think that's very different for a lot of you guys. You know, you can provide services online, so then it has to be, you know, this is why, like this is the very narrow group I serve, and this is why I am the authority, the trusted voice, the person to go to when you have this problem, that kind of thing.
Yeah, finding that niche is so important. I guess the challenge today, though, if your niche is in a digital format, the locality doesn't really much matter, but you still have to have focus. It's the idea of strategy, of focus of force. If you don't focus the force, you're not going to penetrate anything. That's kind of an old military maxim.
And locality can still matter in this day and age, depending on the person, right? Some people they may only want to buy American.
Yep.
I don't know. You know, it depends.
So Riley, we're 5 minutes away, so I'm going to stop the recording and let a couple more questions come in. I think Palo is going to say something, so just let me go ahead and stop that. So